Hey, wanna go somewhere cool?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Maybe let me ask my hunter first.
Your hunter? Come on, this place is for felines only.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you could say it's our motherland.
Well, if you say so.
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, for years and years, comparisons have been drawn between Monster Hunter and another famous video game franchise, the Soulsborne series. This isn't overly surprising. After all, while the gameplay loop itself and the world are totally different in these different franchises, the combat styles are surprisingly similar. Various movesets that you can choose from, then it's just you or a group of you against a massive enemy with a learnable moveset of their own that can be quite difficult to fight if you haven't seen it before, or much easier once you get used to it. The main method of evading attacks in these games is simply a dodge roll that has iframes and a whole host of other reasons that you could compare these two series. But this of course brings up one really big question. What if the games switched? What if the Monster Hunter team made a Souls-like game? How would that function? And what if FromSoftware made a Monster Hunter game? Well, what if I told you that one of these has already happened and that you probably have absolutely no idea about it? Yes, there is in fact a Monster Hunter game that exists that was developed by FromSoftware. No, it's probably not what you're thinking, not in the slightest. It isn't some grand, sprawling, epic adventure tale where you go from one monster to the next like they're an extremely lore-important boss, learning about their place in the world. No, it's actually a silly little feline game. A game called MH Diary Poka Feline Village, which also got a bit of a follow-up in MH Diary Poka Feline Village G, the G-rank expansion to said silly little Palico game. So, what's going on here then? What happened, and what is this potential masterpiece of a crossover between two titans of gaming studios? Well, at its base, this is an adventure game which was released exclusively on the PSP in Japan, with other versions later being released on the 3DS, so it's quite exclusive as far as things go. Within this Monster Hunter game, your home village was full of nothing but felines. You played as felines, and while your opponents, your targets, were still in fact monsters when you did fight, they were quite silly in how they functioned and honestly how they looked. I don't mean silly in a bad way, of course, I mean silly in comparison to what we would normally expect from Monster Hunter, because, well, if this game were made today, I'd be surprised if it wasn't put out on mobile phones, to put it simply.
What are you trying to say?
The quests within this game were an interesting turn-based system that uses elements of what eventually turned into the gameplay of Monster Hunter Stories, but a relatively primitive version of that. You could come across a Gormagala or a whole bunch of other things. It would clearly look as if it was readying an attack at you, and then you'd get a few options. Move forwards, move backwards, or dig underground, and depending on what you chose, you'd either dodge the attack or get hit by it and lose some of your progress on the quest, as you can see at the bottom. If you're successful, you'll get the opportunity to strike back to hit the monster. If you've been grabbing items out of the floor earlier in your journey, then you'll have maybe mushrooms that you can throw at it, or otherwise you'll just have something like a little tiny weapon that you can hit it with. As you can tell from this quick look though, the combat of these games was definitely just a little bit limited, for lack of a better term. It definitely wasn't quite as fleshed out as a full-on main series Monster Hunter game by any means. It was just sort of a cute little fun experience you could go into where the actual monster hunting sections were honestly just not the main focus of the experience. Instead, the focus itself was on the village that you could have and build, which is probably why the games have Feline Village within their title. Within this village, you would slowly amass more and more friendly felines to interact with. You could customize them a bit to look how you wanted. There was a Poogie farm where you could just, well, farm Poogies, and hell, you could even walk around on a Poogie, and in the G-rank sequel to this, there was even a Poogie racing side mechanic, because why the hell would there not be? What I think the important thing to remember here through all of this, though, is that the game was developed by FromSoftware. And look at it. Look at what it is. Yes, game studios can make different kinds of games, and oftentimes they do. I mean, if you literally just made one type of game, you'd be sort of sticking yourself in a corner, and yet usually the different types of games that they make will have a thread of continuity. It will make sense that you would use the knowledge that you got from making one type of game to enhance the other types of games that you make, right? If you normally make action RPGs, then you can use the things that you learn while making that in that genre to make a better fighting game, for example, and things like that. But that begs the question, what exactly is the thread to tie this, again, this silly little cat-based game, to the Dark Souls series, or even any other of FromSoftware's projects in the past? Because if you ask me, this game is an absolute anomaly, and I just find it so mind-blowingly interesting that they chose to make this. The fact that the vast majority of the gameplay is just sort of putting together this happy happy little feline village just doing generally mundane activities, interacting with the locals, or even hatching eggs that you'd found to collect baby monsters. Like I said before, when talking about the combat system, this game is actually eerily reminiscent of a number of the main parts of Monster Hunter Stories, just in much tinier ways. And that game came a number of years after this. In a way, you could argue that these Stories games might well not exist the way that they did without this game as a predecessor, testing out and messing with a number of the concepts that eventually evolved into those games as a whole.
You're nothing without me. Nothing.
And so once again, we round back to a simple point. If you look at this game in a vacuum with no knowledge of its creators or what comes after it, it's just sort of a fun little time sink, right? As of 2010, 2011, when it came out, it's just, hey, let's take these fun little creatures that people seem to like that we recently put in the Monster Hunter series, the felines, and give them their own thing entirely. Let's make it a super chill, relatively uninvolved game and have none of the stressful moments of proper Monster Hunter within it. Just let people hang out with a bunch of cats and do menial tasks for a few hours a day. Just have some fun. Yet when you look at it again, it is made by FromSoftware, who have an incredible track record of making these gigantic sprawling games with some of the deepest lore that you will ever come across, some of the best boss fights that you'll find in video games as a whole, and they're the ones who created this. They're the ones who made it from top to bottom. A game where you just walk around as a massive group of cats gathering mushrooms and bones for your village, climbing up on each other to get honey down from a beehive, and then you just go back to town at the end of the day and have a nice little party around a giant hunk of meat rotating over a fire. And then to think that a number of years later Monster Hunter Stories would come out with relative success, and then a few years later Monster Hunter Stories 2, which actually just smashed it. Tons of people played that game, and most of the people who did really loved doing so. And when you think about it, a number of the base mechanics that are found within the Stories series just completely originated in Monster Hunter Diary Poka Feline Village. And so in this way, you could argue that FromSoftware made an extremely important inclusion in the Monster Hunter franchise, that they actually are responsible for spawning the most successful Monster Hunter spin-offs that came afterwards, because of course, any of the main Monster Hunter series games, or even ones like Frontier, which technically aren't main series, but have the exact same feel, the same combat, that same way that it will treat the players from start to finish, those games are the most popular of the franchise, no doubt about it. But at this point, the ones that are second only to that are the Stories games, based around hatching baby monsters from eggs and turn-based combat against cartoony-looking versions of the monsters that we already know and love. And you know what did that first? This game, Monster Hunter Diary Poka Feline Village. And who made that game? FromSoftware. So let's wrap things up a little bit then. A big surprise to most people in the Monster Hunter community is that there actually has been a massive collaborative effort between the Monster Hunter series and the creators of the Dark Souls franchise. Not just an event quest or an armor set or something in a main series game, but a full-on spin-off. A Monster Hunter game created by FromSoftware, and it is absolutely nothing like what you would expect if I just told you those things. And frankly, if I asked you what you would want from a FromSoftware Monster Hunter game, I bet exactly zero of you would say anything that this game actually gave us. And yet, they made it. It is a wonderful, cute little game, and again, you could say that it is heavily responsible for the eventual existence of the most successful spin-off franchise in Monster Hunter's history. It may not be one of those games itself, but a number of the concepts that were introduced here, a number of the mechanics that are at play, are genuinely, clearly a predecessor to things that we got fleshed out a fair bit in Monster Hunter Stories a few years down the road. And that is just absolutely fascinating to me. Two titans of game design coming together to make something so simple, so silly, and yet so lovely and well made. And while at first glance it didn't have a massive impact, the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes this actually led to even greater things happening in the future for Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter Diary Poka Feline Village. To think that something like this not only came from the minds of FromSoftware, the same minds of the entire Soulsborne series, but also served as a testing ground for Monster Hunter Stories. I'm literally the one making this video, having studied everything I can about these games, and yet it still blows my mind to think about this. I hope you've enjoyed this fun little discussion about a rarely talked about part of Monster Hunter history that I think many fans would find quite surprising and interesting simultaneously. Let me know what you think about it, of course. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.